ever feel like life's just a little too much sometimes? Like we're constantly drowning in to-do lists and deadlines and like a million notifications buzzing at us.
Yeah, it's definitely a common feeling, even today. But what's interesting is this whole feeling overwhelmed. It's not new. Ancient philosophers, especially the Stoics, were wrestling with that exact feeling.
And they developed this whole philosophy, this way of life, actually, to deal with it. So that's what we're diving into today, Stoicism. But don't worry, we're not going to get bogged down with all the, academic jargon. We're going to uncover how Stoicism can actually be surprisingly relevant, even today, for dealing with the chaos of, well, everything.
And to make things even more interesting, we'll even get into how modern science is finding proof, you could say, for some of these ancient philosophical ideas, especially when it comes to that mind-body connection.
Yeah, because it turns out the Stoics might have been onto something with this idea that our thoughts and emotions and physical well-being, it's all connected. But first, let's rewind the clock a bit. Imagine ancient Athens, like way back in the 3rd century BC. Our story starts not in some stuffy classroom, but out in the open, in a bustling marketplace at a spot called the Stoa Poikile.
A place known for, get this, its vibrant murals. That's actually where the Stoics got their name. Picture philosophers just hanging out right there in the middle of the marketplace, having these passionate debates about life, virtue, happiness, the whole shebang.
I like that image. Kind of breaks the mold of, the philosopher sitting alone on a mountaintop, doesn't it? That these ancient discussions were happening in the thick of things.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that Stoicism, even though it has these ancient roots, wasn't static, like frozen in time. It evolved, got passed down, reinterpreted, each generation adding its own spin on things.
And we're talking about some big names here. We've got Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism. And then there's Seneca, Roman statesman, philosopher, the whole deal. And of course, gotta mention the emperor philosopher himself, Marcus Aurelius. Each of them left their mark on Stoicism.
And what's amazing is that their ideas, we only have these fragments, writings, letters, but even today they still resonate. So what were these Stoics actually saying? What were the core ideas that had captivated people for centuries?
Let's get into it then. What was the Stoic game plan for navigating life? Our sources keep talking about this idea that virtue is the ultimate good. What's that all about?
Okay, so that's where things get really interesting. For the Stoics, virtue wasn't just about being, a good person in the typical way. It went deeper. Virtue, for them, meant living in accordance with nature.
Okay, now we got to unpack this living in accordance with nature thing.
Yeah.
It sounds so simple, almost obvious, but I have a feeling it's a lot more nuanced than that.
It's not as simple as it sounds. See, for the Stoics, nature wasn't just like trees and mountains, although they definitely saw beauty and order in the natural world. But they saw nature as this force, this logos, that was driven by reason, and it connected everything.
So living in accordance with nature meant aligning yourself with this universal reason. How do you actually live that out, though, in everyday life?
It's about recognizing that as humans, we have this ability to reason too. And if we use it, we can actually control our thoughts and actions, even when things around us are totally out of control.
This is where that whole Stoic idea of focusing on what you can control comes in, right?
Exactly. The Stoics knew that a lot of life, it's just not up to us. Like, we can't control the weather, other people's moods, not even our own health completely.
It's kind of humbling when you really think about it, right? That in this world that often feels totally random, we only have so much say.
For sure. But instead of freaking out about it, the Stoics thought this realization was actually freeing. Because, yeah, we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to it.
It's not about pretending you don't have feelings, which is what some people think when they hear about Stoicism. It's more about deciding how you're going to respond to those feelings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's recognizing that our emotions, yeah, they're powerful, but they're often temporary too. They don't have to call the shots.
And this circles back to virtue, doesn't it? Because it's in those moments where you choose how you're going to react to a challenge, a setback. That's when you're really flexing that virtue muscle.
And to the Stoics, that constant practice, that trying to live by reason and virtue, that was the key to true happiness. They called it eudaimonia, this state of flourishing, of really living in sync with your nature.
It's interesting. Most of the time, we think about happiness as something outside of us, something we get from having things or going places. But the Stoics are saying it's the opposite. Real happiness, that eudaimonia, comes from within, from mastering yourself, your reactions, and choosing virtue even when it's hard.
And this mastery, this inner strength the Stoics were all about, well, modern science is starting to understand it better, especially when we look at how connected our minds and bodies really are.
Right. We've got that research from Washington University that dives into this. Can you tell us about this Somatocognitive Action Network, SCAN for short?
Now, this is where things get super interesting. This CAN discovery, it's changing how we see the mind-body connection. It's not just some abstract idea anymore. It's a real network in our brains.
So there's literally a physical network, like a central hub in our brains where our thoughts and emotions and physical sensations are all linked up.
Exactly. Think of SCAN as mission control, always taking in information from both inside and outside of us. But here's the thing, this network doesn't just react to our experiences, it actually shapes them too.
Hold on, so you're saying what we think and feel can actually directly affect our bodies, and the other way around, what's going on in our bodies can mess with our thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. The mind and body, they're not separate, they're like two sides of the same coin constantly influencing each other.
And that's where those articles we have from Summa Health and Healthline come in, right?
Yeah.
The ones about exercise and meditation. It's like the Stoics, they knew this mind-body connection was a thing way back when, and now science is catching up. It's like that saying, healthy mind, healthy body, right? The Stoics, I mean, they didn't have labs and stuff back then, but they seem to get that taking care of both your mental and physical well-being, that was key to living a virtuous life. Which brings us to this kind of random document, Texto Pagado.
Yeah, that list of foods and supplements definitely caught my eye too. It's funny, the Stoics didn't have like a strict diet or anything, but this idea of nourishing your body to strengthen your mind, it totally fits with their whole philosophy.
Yeah, like even just choosing what you eat, that could be an act of aligning yourself with nature for them. So this Texto Pagado, not like a Stoic grocery list, but there are some interesting things in here, like fish oil. We always hear about that being good for your brain.
Right, and a healthy, sharp brain, that's something the Stoics were all about. They put so much emphasis on reason, thinking clearly.
Totally. Almost like our ability to reason, to make choices based on logic and virtue. It's a muscle you got to train, got to feed it the right stuff.
Yeah.
And speaking of, there's also magnesium on this list. People say it's good for anxiety.
Makes you wonder, right? Like, could something as basic as getting enough magnesium help us with those emotions the Stoics were always trying to master? It's a cool link between old school wisdom and modern science.
It really is. And it goes back to that idea that, yeah, we can't control everything that life throws at us, but we can make choices that support us, body and mind. Choices that maybe, just maybe, help us face the world with a little more, I don't know, stoic calm.
Which is, at the end of the day, that's what Stoicism is all about. It's not about being a robot with no feelings. It's about using your mind to get through life's challenges with, I don't know, more grace, more wisdom.
It's about remembering that even when things are crazy, we still get to choose how we respond. That even the smallest shift in perspective, a tiny act of virtue, it can make a difference.
And maybe that's something that goes beyond just a philosophy. Maybe it's something deeply human we all share.
We started this whole deep dive looking at how the Stoics dealt with their world, and it turns out their wisdom, it wasn't just for them. It's actually super relevant for us even now. We've talked about virtue, about focusing on what you can control, and about how amazingly connected our minds and bodies really are. So next time things get hectic, try this. How could you use a little stoicism in your own life? What small change, what little act of virtue could bring you a little closer to that sense of inner peace, that resilience the Stoics were all about? Remember, the journey to a better life, it often starts with just one choice.